Hey everyone, Chris here with another filler episode. And what you're looking at right now is the entertainment center in my basement. And yeah, I got a lot of game consoles hooked up to that television there. Though not exactly the most impressive television, it's just a standard 27-inch CRT thing. I'll eventually get a bigger one, but it still works pretty well for now. So anyways, I just wanted to sort of give an idea of the kind of gaming hardware that I've got, like my consoles, my portables, and my computers. I'll probably do them in that order, but today we're taking a look at my consoles, so let's get going. First we have my Atari 2600, and it's not actually the very first game system I owned. I only got this thing a few years ago when I was looking into doing 2600 homebrew stuff. But I've had it for a while now, and I've got about 60 games for it, which may seem like a lot, but Atari 2600 games are the kinds of things you pop in for just a few minutes and you just scroll through them one after another. Or unless, of course, it's a two-player game or something you're playing with another person. This is actually not a heavy sixer, it's a light sixer. So what that means is that the original 2600 to come out was referred to as a heavy sixer because of how heavy the unit was. And this one's referred to a light sixer because it's a later model, it's not as heavy, and it still has 6 switches. Pretty much every model after this one only has 4 switches. Move the difficulty switches to the back. Sitting next to my 2600 is my ColecoVision. Now, this is actually the most recent system I've acquired. I only got it about a couple years ago, despite the fact that ColecoVision is a lot older than that. In any case, I've got a couple dozen games for it, and the interesting thing about this particular system is that even though I acquired it from a US seller, it's actually the Canadian model, so it has both English and French text all over the system. Other than that though, it works pretty well, and it's the exact same as any other ColecoVision system. Over here we have my Nintendo Entertainment System. Now this is the first game system I owned. Technically. I actually owned a Game Boy before my NES, but only by about 5 days, so I guess I got them about the same time, roughly. Actually, I had 2 NES systems growing up. My first one I got was from my mother, and then a year later I got one from my cousin because he didn't want his anymore. And then eventually, when I moved into my own place, I gave my second NES to my mother so she could get her Tetris 2 fix. Other than that, not really much else to say, though I do have an NES Advantage joystick for it because that's like... having that joystick is just awesome, really. I have about 36 games for my NES. Over here is my Super Nintendo, and yeah, it's kind of yellowing a bit. I have no idea how to make it into normal color again, which is what it looks like in front of the cartridge slot. So yeah, some of the system is yellowing and some of it isn't. I have no idea why it's doing that. In any case, I've had this system for about as long as it's existed for, and I have about 20 games for it, with one of my favorites actually being the one that's in there right now, Dragon View, which I know sounds like a strange title for a game, and it's not actually anything spectacular, but it's a really simple and fun game to play, and it also has one of the longest game endings ever. I mean, seriously, it's 24 minutes long. That is what you call an ending. And yeah, I also have Final Fantasy III for this thing, which would make that my most valuable game for the console. Next to it is my Nintendo 64. Now, this is actually the second console that I purchased with my own money, and I don't really have too many games for it. I only got about a dozen for it. The interesting thing though is that my very first game for this system was not Super Mario 64. In fact, I only got Super Mario 64 a few years ago. I'd actually played completely through Mario Sunshine by this time. But actually my first game for this system was Pokemon Snap. Yeah. Not too much else to say about it, really. Sitting behind my NES in its original box is my Nintendo Gamecube. Now, I've had this for pretty much the lifespan of the Gamecube, and the reason why it's in its original box should be pretty apparent, but it served its purpose. And it's not actually the blue version, it's the platinum version. I have about a dozen games for it. But the reason why I don't have it set out anymore is because of the Wii. And yep, this is actually the most powerful system I have. Yeah, I don't have an Xbox 360, I don't have a PlayStation 3. The reasons why I don't have those consoles is because the only games I want on them, really, are also on the PC. And my PC is my most powerful system. So there's no reason for me to have those consoles. So my Wii is the most powerful game console I've got connected to my television. And I actually do still use it. I've got almost 20 games for this thing, not counting virtual console stuff, which I primarily use for TurboGrafx-16 games since I have no intention to collect for the TG-16 anytime soon. And most of the games I've got for this thing are actually pretty good, so I still use it. Moving on to Sega consoles, I've got 3 of them all lined up underneath the table here, so it's kind of hard to film them. In any case, sitting in the middle is my Sega Master System. Now, the interesting thing about this is that I only acquired the Master System about a decade ago, and my intention was to start collecting Master System games, but just like all Sega systems, it's hard to collect the really good games for this thing. In any case, I've got about a dozen games for it, nothing too fancy. The most valuable game I've got is the one that's in there, Wonder Boy 3: The Dragon's Trap. It also happens to be one of the Master Systems that has 2 built-in games, not counting the Maze thing, which was in every one of them. But the 2 built-in games are Hang On and Safari Hunt. Sitting to the left of it is my Sega Genesis. It's an original Model 1, which I have had for quite a while now. In fact, I got it the same year I got my second NES. So I've had it for a while, and I've got some really good games for it, even though I've only got about a dozen for it. Though what's interesting is that, you think about that, I've had my Genesis for almost its entire lifespan. Same with my Super Nintendo. Like, when I was growing up, most kids only had a Super Nintendo or a Sega Genesis. They didn't have both of them. I had both of them. So I got the best of both worlds growing up. And that's pretty much why I've got mostly Sega and Nintendo consoles down here. To the right of my Master System is my Sega Saturn. Now, this has the distinction of being the very first console I purchased with my own money, but I bought it just days before the Dreamcast was announced. So yeah, suffice to say I don't have many games for this thing because it was already on its way out by the time I started collecting for it. I've only got about 7 games, but the games I have, thankfully, are good ones. And in fact, I actually have Nights into Dreams on this thing, which is probably one of the best games on the system. The sequel on the Wii is terrible, but at least the original is awesome. Sitting next to my NES is my Dreamcast. Now, I don't have too many games for this thing either. Again, I've only got about 7 or 8 games for it, and the reason for that is, again, it's hard to collect for this thing. The games for Sega systems are really expensive compared to games for Nintendo systems, especially the good ones. In any case, the reason why I have 3 controllers for this thing when I don't have extra controllers for pretty much the rest of my consoles is because mainly of Sonic Shuffle. It's a party game much like Mario Party. In fact, it was made by the same people, and it was the only game I could get not only my friends to play, but my sister's friends to play. So what ended up happening, it was the only game we ended up playing when anyone came over, whether it was my friends or hers, so that's why I've got 3 controllers for it. In any case, my first games for it were Sonic Adventure and Street Fighter 3 Third Strike, and yeah, that's all I gotta say about that. And lastly is my PlayStation 2. Yes, it is an original model PlayStation 2, and yes, it does still work perfectly fine. It plays DVDs perfectly fine, it plays PlayStation 2 games perfectly fine, both on DVD and on those blue CDs. It plays PlayStation 1 games perfectly fine. The thing has just always worked, and I have no complaints really. I've got about 17 games for it, and a few PlayStation 1 games as well. Nothing too spectacular, and I also use it as my DVD player since I don't have a real DVD player. And yeah, that's about all there is to say about that. So yeah, that was just a brief look at my game console collection. I know it seems like I've got way too many consoles compared to the number of games I have, because I only have so few games for each console, but the thing is, I have what I like to call a functional collection, i.e., every single game in my collection, say for maybe a couple or 3 of them, I would be willing to pop in and play anytime I wanted. So that's all I gotta say about that, so stay tuned for the next filler. I'll be taking a look at my portables or my computers. I'm not sure which I'm gonna do first, but definitely will end up doing both of them, so stay tuned.